webinar, Trends in Cloud Application Development, Best Practices in Outsourcing and Internal Development. My name is David Goodstein, and I'm a webinar coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It's our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with KeyedIn Solutions. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to quickly tell you about the questions box you can use throughout today's presentation. To submit a question to today's speakers, just click on the questions box, type your question in the space provided, and click the submit button. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll be receiving a follow-up email in 1 day, which will have a link to today's recorded webinar and presentation slides as well. It will also have contact information for the speakers of today's webinar. So at this time, I'd like to quickly say a few words about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Kenneth Hoffman, Director at Avasant. He will be our moderator today.
Good morning or good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Trends in Cloud Application Development. First, I want to say thank you to our hosts, the Outsourcing Institute, and the KeyedIn Solutions. Again, my name is Kenneth Hoffman, and I'm a director with Avasant. Just a few words about Avasant. Avasant is a premier management consulting firm focused on servicing global blue-chip clients in both the public and private sectors. Avasant services include strategic sourcing, advisory services, IT and business transformation services, and globalization services in emerging markets. Now let me briefly introduce you to our panelists, Rich Dumelle, General Manager of KeyedIn Solutions Flex Product, and Wayne Byrne, Director of Product Marketing for KeyedIn Solutions Flex Product. Wayne?
Hi, Kenneth. Thank you for that. So I can't see my little bio blurb thing showing up there, so I'll just give you guys a little bit of a background about who I am. So like you mentioned, I'm responsible for product marketing for Keaton Flex, which is our platform product. And my background is I've been involved in some form of workflow or some form of startup for the last 10 years, going back. So really, I was the original architect of the Flex PaaS platform, and it was really the result of my frustration with what we're going to talk about today, right, with traditional cloud-based development going all the way back to when people had mainframes and so on. So if we can go to the next slide. I know there's my colleague Rich there. There we go. Okay, so that's me again. So as mentioned there, I was a founder of Iceberg, which was eventually acquired by KeyedIn, and the technology that we were developing at Iceberg became really the core of the Flex platform, which we're working with now. So just to talk about the evolution of software and where we're going. So can we move on to the next slide? Great. So what we're going to cover today, number one, the evolution of app development. Now when I say app, obviously I mean application. These days, those terms, it doesn't just mean a phone. Obviously it means larger enterprise systems, HR, CRM, and so on. The challenges of the existing application development, the new way to develop, really how it should be fast and flexible, using cloud application development, the difference between a standard platform and a development tool, and then the components and a demo of our own technology, which really is, we feel, a very good example of where we believe the market is going. So on the next slide, you'll see, oh, okay, great.
Now we have a polling question. If we could get everyone in the audience to participate and select one of the 4 options. And the question is, what cloud initiatives are you looking to put in place? We'll give everybody about 30 seconds to answer the question.
That's great. Thanks for that, Kenneth. We were talking a little bit briefly before the call, and my money would be on option 3 and option 1. I really think that's what I've been kind of seeing most in the marketplace, but I'd be really interested to see what our panelists think.
And the answers are coming back now. The lead answer is all of the above with 42%. In second place, replace existing software applications with cloud applications at 33%. And in third place, add mobile functions or additional features to existing systems with 25%.
That's great. I have to say, it's actually very encouraging, because one of the things I'm most impressed with in the market is people's willingness to rebuild their legacy systems and move them to the cloud, because that can often be a little bit of a scary undertaking. Okay, so now just to touch briefly on the evolution of software development with this highly scientific graphic here. Really, if we think back, right, now this is before my time, but in the old days we had the mainframes, the AS400s, the original ERP type systems, and then we had, when I started getting involved in my first job, when I started seeing client-server type applications. You know, when I was a kid, I was working on a help desk, and we had this kind of desktop software, and there was no workflow, and it was pretty much everything was on a single form, and any change to the system, you know, often took a year plus, and it was an actual client-server technology to the extent that there were like backup cache files on your hard drive that sometimes would fill your entire hard drive, and the way to fix it would be to find these files and delete them, right? So really the very definition of client and server. And of course, we all know what was wrong with that. And once the browser server time came along, we were all very happy. But what happened between those two was kind of funny. There was an effort of bringing those existing systems to the cloud, right? There was an effort of doing what some people called ASPs, application service providers. It was a little bit of a flash in the pan, and it went away. I'm not sure really if everybody will remember that, but the idea was that you could get the existing systems like, you know, let's say SAP or Oracle, and via Citrix or some kind of remote desktop effort, you were paying a license model for those pieces of software, but they weren't installed on your actual network. So even though the technology hadn't caught up, that really had shown that there was definitely a market for it. Nobody had the bandwidth for that, of course. I mean, running SAP over a 14K modem, must have been really, really painful. So you won't have heard of ASP very much, but it did really pave the way for where we ended up, which is browser server, right? Where we had our best friend Amazon.com really led the way, and you know, Mark Benioff talks about this a lot, how that inspired the first version of Force.com, that he wanted Salesforce to be as simple and easy to use as Amazon. And even when you go in and you see that the various tabs and so on, that's a design feature that Amazon used to have, and it's since gone from Amazon, but it's actually still in Salesforce. So that was very, very exciting, and it, you know, obviously gave tremendous improvements and pretty much gave birth to a whole new industry overnight. But it still had a lot of the same development type problems, and there was still, of course, a ton of coding involved. And then, of course, you had, you know, issues with the various different browsers, and you still had to look after your various servers and your scaling. The light at the end of the tunnel really started to show up, funnily enough, again, for me, it came out of Amazon again, which was this idea of the cloud, right? And the first time I heard that kind of realistically put together, it was when we were looking at Google and how Google had their search engine set up. That all of the machines that were running the Google search system were just these commodity, you know, second-hand type machines, and they were all running some virtualized operating system. The idea was that there were just hundreds or thousands of these machines just lying around in these various server decks. And if some of them died or fell over it, it didn't matter, right? Whereas in any other system, if one of your machines dies, it was obviously a really, really big problem. But they really nailed the concept of having it virtualized and set up in such a way that it was all one shared pool of compute resource. And if some of the nodes died off, that was okay. So I know these days everybody talks about the cloud so much, and pretty much anything, any app that's on the internet, you can get away with calling it a cloud app. But the initial true idea of cloud, which we still want to underline and bring forward, is that it's elastic and it's scalable and it's recoverable. If some of the nodes die, that's perfectly okay. So Amazon then, of course, came out with EC2, and it's interesting because EC2 used to run the actual Amazon website. And I remember reading articles before it came out that Amazon were experimenting with this new thing. And they had, for example, when the Nintendo Wii came out, there was a huge demand, and they wanted to see if the Amazon website could hold up to that incredible demand for this Nintendo Wii. As I recall, it went down for a couple of hours, but it was still incredibly impressive what they did, because the volume and the spike in traffic was really incredible. So that's another excellent example of how you've got a whole bunch of servers, they're completely virtualized, and you don't have to think about specific disks or specific machines in a specific place, right? All you do is you load up your code or whatever, and you get what you need. So that was really great, and Microsoft have one as well with Azure, and people are building applications, and this is giving birth to another little revolution. And of course, a lot of startups are very, very happy with this. The barrier of entry for a startup is a fraction of what it was years ago, but still, you're still writing code for an actual business, for a CIO of a major corporation. This does not massively solve his problem. Okay, I can take servers out of my basement, I can put them somewhere else, but my IT guys now are, they're uploading code to 5 or 6 virtual servers on EC2, but I still have to manage those servers. I've got my guys writing APIs, I'm trying to automate the process, and it's a whole thing. So the problem is just really moved, right? Where we see the market really going, what's very exciting to us, is where your business user, your CIO, is really able to focus on the end result. Okay, let's not talk about development. Let's not talk about specific applications. Let's not talk about, where the code is hosting. Can I just focus on my actual business goal? I want to I want to improve my recruiting process by 50%. I want to fully automate my PO process, right? These are the kinds of outcomes that CIOs, especially today, are being tasked with, because, as everybody knows, they're being really asked, I suppose, politely, but sometimes not so politely, to deliver, sometimes twice as much with very often half as much budget. And where we really see the future of this is what we would call configurable pass. Some people would call this like a visual pass or configurable SAS, but the summary really is that you're getting all of the benefits of a SAS type application, but you're able to configure it without coding to match your exact business needs, right? And that's really the kind of the holy grail of where we're going. So on the next slide, you'll see that broken down a little bit.
Wayne,
so,
if I could interject just briefly,
please, Kenneth.
I would like to encourage the audience to, if you have a question during the presentation, we'd like to make this as interactive as possible, and please submit any questions that you may have. And Wayne, I have a quick question for you regarding the evolution of slide. What are the main drivers that you see in the marketplace that are pushing this kind of change?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Kenneth. Thanks for that. So there's a couple that really jump out at me, right? One is the baby boomers and the new Gen Y class of user, which is coming up within enterprises these days, right? A lot of these older type systems would just be, expecting somebody who uses Facebook on their phone all day to sit down and log into SAP, one of those really clunky, slow type applications where it's like really complicated and there's 50 fields. That's really a big ask. Then also on top of that, we have compliance, right? So a lot of applications or processes which didn't need to be automated before as a result of a lot of more recent compliance things. Now they all have to be completely managed and completely automated. For example, do you have a database of all of your assets or all of your logins, and is there a process? What happens when somebody is off-boarded from your company? A lot of companies, even though they bought the big expensive HR system, they haven't fully implemented all of those processes, and now, every time you get an audit done, you're finding another one of those things. And then obviously the last one is cloud. But I don't want to just say cloud because there's really drivers behind cloud, and those drivers, like we already touched on, are price and time, right? The rate of change has just so dramatically increased in every single industry. It's unrecognizable even from where it was 5 years ago. And of course, price-wise, the good old days of the IT gold rush are very, very long gone, and they're absolutely not coming back. So every IT department has to deliver more with less. And sure, to a certain extent, people look to moving applications to the cloud to deliver that, but that in itself isn't enough. You really need some kind of a configurable platform, as we've discussed, or you're really just moving the problem from your basement to Amazon's basement. So hopefully that answered the question, but absolutely, Kenneth, if people do have questions or they want to interject or they have a point, then absolutely please do add it on the GoToMeeting chat window. Okay, so picking up where we left off, this is really the classic IT manager or CIO dilemma, right? I have a particular need, so do I build something or do I go and buy something? And this is something I see all the time for the past 10 years. So just to touch briefly, right? Custom development has a lot of good things. It's completely tailored. You have total control. It matches your business, and it integrates with what you already have, right? Off the shelf is really good because it's got more powerful features than your developers could ever possibly provide, right? Because you have maybe 5 developers building a small HR system, but they could never compete with the 50 developers who spent, 20 man-years working on a HR system that you would purchase. But of course, you still have to worry about the scaling a lot of the time if you're managing it yourself, and it's inflexible. And there's high license fees, and you still have to do the integration. And a lot of the time, there's no workflow and automation. And then going back to custom development, of course, we can see there's high development costs. There's very long development cycles. There's communication problems, servers, updates, bugs. The question mark, is it scalable, right? You could have something built internally and think, oh, well, this is great. It's built on the best new standards and so on. But really, until you put it into the real world and have thousands of users log in, you have no idea, as opposed to something which is built on a more proven platform which has already had its shots, to use a metaphor. And then, of course, there's the element of security and compliance, right? Getting back to the element that I was speaking about before, which is these days, because of the very high security and compliance levels, the amount of functionality that any system needs, whether it's a CRM app or something for HR or even a very basic database, the level of control over who is accessing what and what people are able to see, specific records and field level permissions and encryption, not to mention all the back-end stuff like backups and so on, that bar is so high that it would take any development team several years just to get even to first log on. So I think that's really changed the game in terms of if you did decide to custom develop something in-house, then you'd really think twice these days. So if we dig a little bit more in on the next slide, you'll see, so these are some common issues that I've seen with the traditional build process. To me, the absolute number one problem is communication. Now, from Dilbert to various other online comics and so on, there's we don't need to tell anybody this. Everybody knows that business manager types and developers argue ceaselessly about what an application is meant to do. And lots of new technologies have come out recently and methodologies like Agile and so on, which are really meant to kind of solve that problem. But ultimately, the problem kind of still remains. Because if you've got the person who understands the problem and then the actual developer who's writing the code, and then you've got a minimum of 3 managers between the two of them, then that's obviously going to cause problems. Now, when you scale that out and you've got a larger organization, maybe outsourcing and so on, that can be larger again. That can be 10, 15 people when you scale it across a wider team. And we all know from when we were kids playing the telephone game that even 2 levels, the message can just get completely lost. So not only does the message get lost, but it can often be 6 months until you find out that the message was lost and that what you've received isn't actually what you wanted. Another little dirty secret about this is that it's very often the other way around. A lot of the times the business user who's looking for a product doesn't realize what they want until they see what they don't want. So they put together a spec for version 1, and it's only when they see version 1, even if it's exactly what they requested, it's only when they physically see it, and especially end users, when they see that product, then they go, oh, yeah, I have 50 changes that just didn't occur to me. I couldn't have thought of them until I saw like a version 1. So that obviously adds to cost, right? So you've got number of developers times number of years times the amount of changes, which of course can result in some of these really, really crazy, almost famous disasters which you would have heard of, where a basic ERP system ended up taking 10 years and costing X million dollars to implement when the initial budget was 20% of that. And then of course time, because it can take a minimum of months to get to a first version, let alone something you can actually put into production. And then we're back to this level again, right? Security and compliance. The very, what does it take to get to the very, very minimum that this system will have to do in terms of workflow tracking, security, performance, and so on. And frankly, the bar has been raised so high by the likes of Amazon and Salesforce and so on that an internal development team these days, they really just can't compete. So on the next slide, we'll kind of dig in a little bit more. And here you can see a graphic that, hopefully a lot of you will be familiar with from the old days. And this is kind of a traditional product lifecycle map, where you go all the way from plan, code design, set up infrastructure, you testing, launch the application, get feedback, and then go back to plan, right? And this makes a lot of sense when you look at it, especially if you understand that really if you're like writing code one line at a time, you need a strongly regimented process like this, because every step, whether it's provisioning servers or whether it is writing the specific lines of code, any one of those steps could take down the entire application. Maybe even worse, maybe it could expose the application. So, you're having one of those very famous security issue where people find your customers' credit cards on Google and so on, right? So, this stuff is no joke. But this process, obviously, it's not simple, it's not easy, it's not scalable, and it's really not practical anymore in the modern environment. And of course, these days with Agile, there's a much simplified version, but the main key problems, do still exist. You still have cost, communication, and barrier to entry. So if we take it to the next slide. So presuming that you didn't build a system, right? If you said, okay, well, you know what? You've convinced me I'm going to buy a system. Well, even then, your problem isn't solved because it doesn't match your business. And a lot of the times we see that businesses change to match their software. So they've been doing things for a while and it works out well for them, but then they decide they're going to buy a system, like let's say an ERP or a finance system, and now they have to change all of their processes to match the way their software system works. And so for a start, they have to retrain people and the whole process has changed. But also, they're now stuck. They can't respond. They can't be agile. If they see an opportunity in a particular market or to do things a particular way, they can't. Basically, they have to keep working the way their software does, or get into very high customization fees and again projects which really are comparable to custom development. Obviously, the per-user pricing is high because the vendors have had to spend so much time coding this application. They have to charge a premium for every single user who logs into the app, and you're seeing maybe upwards of $1,000 per user per year for some of these applications. Then, of course, you've got the fact that you've got so many different of these apps. A prospect the other day had 40 separate apps, just that they could, just large ones, not even including smaller ones. And none of them were integrated with each other, right? One's on this cloud, one's on that cloud, one's on this platform, one's this vendor, and so on. And if you want them to play together, then you have to, buy BPM and ETL type tools, which is, of course, back to the SI firms and more cost again. And then, of course, the training, because if you've got 40 different systems, they all have their own different interfaces. They all have their own way of working. And you, of course, have to train your staff how to get used to those interfaces. And something kind of unknown, but the more different interfaces people have to use, the less good they get at all of them. If you have to spin 10 different plates all day, then the plates really start to suffer. And you need to be retrained and retrained. So if we go on to the next slide, then this is really what we see as how it should be. This is what I would call configurable SAS, right? We have a little note there saying the KeyedIn way. This is kind of part of our vision. So the idea is that it's very simple, it's very robust. You plan, you test and deploy, you configure. You're not doing any coding. You're just configuring, point and click, drag and drop, and then you launch. And all of this happens in the cloud, and all of it happens in real time. So there's so many things, so many steps that are just left out of the process. The integration step, gone, because it's all the one system. The database and the app are completely integrated. Testing the security and so on, well, you don't need to do that because that's built in. And there's just so many of those steps. So you're really, really just focusing on what does the end user see and what is the app meant to do in terms of its business logic. So if we look at the next slide. So here, I don't really think for this audience that I need to talk about this, but it's worth just kind of noting again, right? The cloud is definitely here. It's not going away. And whether you listen to, IDC or Gartner or whatever, it's certainly taking over, right? We've reached a stage where really, unless you're in banking or finance or, maybe healthcare, frankly, no CIO or CTO these days wants to have a basement full of servers that could just die and then all of your data would be gone, right? Everybody wants to make that somebody else's problem. Everybody wants to co-locate it off to, EC2 or Microsoft or whatever, so your data is in 2 data centers, geographically located across America, and you can just go to sleep knowing that even if the worst thing happens and there's, a flood, a tornado, whatever, that everything's going to be completely fine and everybody can work from home tomorrow on their iPad. Right? I mean, that was really the vision we were sold, and for once, it was true. Google Drive, Gmail, Facebook, Amazon, these are really amazing systems which did not disappoint. They all did exactly what they said they were going to, and the enterprise equivalent of that is really, really starting to kick in now. So moving to the next slide. So this is where I wanted to speak just briefly about. It's a little bit about our own platform, but specifically, this is where I wanted to explain the difference. When people say cloud and they say platform, it can often be very confusing. So if I start down in the bottom right-hand corner, the blue circle there, right, where it says infrastructure. So that's really servers. That's hardware iron. So that's EC2, it's Rackspace, it's Azure, and of course there's Red Hat. There's lots and lots of different vendors, more and more showing up every day. And there's different flavors and spin-offs of that where people put a little bit of a layer of code on top of EC2 and it automates Rails code and so on, like Engine Yard. So what do you get with that? You get databases very often. You get scalability, storage, security. And I included permissions there, but a lot of the systems within the infrastructure side actually really don't provide permissions. That's something that you would still have to build into your actual app. But it groups well within that section. Then the other section going to the bottom left would be really the process and BPM side. So that's something that's very, very often left out of applications. You start building an application, you're focused on the forms and the UI when you're writing your spec, and when you're done, then people log in and start using it, and you say, oh, we need to automate this, we need to automate that. What happens when a task gets assigned to Dave and he doesn't respond? Well, in most systems, the answer is nothing. Nothing happens at all. You have to email Dave and follow Dave and probably call him or go down and bang on his window and say, hey, Dave, check out case 257. And that's very, very common, right? So eventually, once the system has become a little bit mature, enterprises often will buy a BPM type system, right? So they'll buy a TIBCO or a K2. And again, there's lots of solid vendors in that area. But that's really all they do. You get a form or you get integration with your existing system. And then, of course, up the top, you've got just the application layer, right? Vendors who provide just the interface. And probably everybody's favorite or maybe least favorite example of this would be SharePoint. And I put DNN in there as well. That's .NET Nuke. But that would really be for your more technical types. But with SharePoint, you get a really great interface. You can configure it, and you can upload files, and you get forms. And to a certain extent, you get some grids and dashboards and so on. But if you want to really build an application or, replace a project that would have been development, it obviously won't work. It falls over fairly quickly because you're missing the process element, right? And then even if you, host internally, you're missing the EC2 type place. So any one of these items, they're really, really good in their own right, but none of them could replace the equivalent of, none of them gives you the same outcome as when you pay for a SaaS solution that exactly matches your needs. Of course, the problem is that SaaS solutions never exactly match your needs, and the per user cost, is so high. So that's why we've got that blue circle there in the middle, which is Flex. So from its initial conception, right through even to now after the acquisition, the real vision of Flex is to be that one center point, to be the one system that has all of those different features all intersecting. And at that point, you don't need to buy anything else. You just log in, drag and drop, you get exactly what you want, and everything else is handled for you. So that's really where we believe the industry is going, and it's certainly where we are. So if we move to the next slide. So this is just dragging in a little bit more on detail of some of those items, right? So how do you do this? How do you have a configurable SAS? So it really starts with drag and drop, right? If you've got too much scripting or any of those kinds of things, or it's a browser-based IDE, then really, again, you've just moved the problem. You're just pushing dirt around. So drag and drop form designer, obviously, drag and drop workflow designer. You really need powerful dashboards built in, right? Some basic BI, the ability to make charts, pivot charts, right? Multi-table reports, things like that. Dynamic responsive forms is something that really we don't see often enough. And again, it's something that only comes up when you try and build something real. You can make a demo application very quickly, but when you try and make a real form that's going to be customer or end user facing, and it can't respond in real time, for example, if I pick a particular type of purchase order, then prompt the user for these fields, don't prompt them for those other fields. These are the kind of things that happen in real life. But most, even the best platforms don't support them, so you're back to writing code, even presuming the platform allows you. So we extended our workflow designer tool to really facilitate those kinds of forms, and the result is really pretty special. Of course, the data model needs to be scalable. A lot of platforms are custom-coded things. There's a lot of talk these days about these different types of databases, right? The NoSQL type databases and so on, which are fine for unstructured data, but the majority of B2B applications are very structured data, and the relationships are incredibly important. So sure, it's really easy to build something quickly with unstructured data, but try querying that data when you've got 10 million records, and try pointing like crystal reports at it. It's not going to work. The interface obviously has to be intuitive, right? There's no point having a drag and drop interface when it takes 10 clicks to build a basic form, right? You need to be able to make changes while you're looking at it. The business user needs to be empowered here. And finally, application and change management. You need to help solve a lot of the problems that even code had. So when you build an application, you need to be able to package that application and then deploy it anywhere. But then also, you need to be able to automate the process of rolling out the changes that you make to your core app out to your various different customers. And it can't be a clunky kind of thing where they have to do it themselves and click update and so on. It has to be as smooth and seamless as, personally, I like Google Chrome. The Google Chrome updates are really good. And that's the model that we're following. So next slide. So really wrapping up here, right, and then we'll be giving you a brief demo of what we believe is the future of enterprise application development. But before then, just to recap, like why would you choose to configure instead of code something or even buy something off the shelf, right? To me, the most obvious one is that you inherit the crucial enterprise features. So anything that you make, any form you make, should automatically have all of the enterprise level tracking, permissions, security, and so on, and various different types of interfaces that you would need. You also get the best of both worlds, right, where you're getting all of the benefits of SAS and all the benefits of PaaS or coding without any of the downside. The risk is obviously vastly lower. If you're able to click around, drag and drop, configure a basic draft of your application in maybe only a couple of hours, and you can see that working and you can demo and test with your customers or even internal customers like your end users, that is a very, very low-risk proposition because you'll know after only spending a few days whether this is the right track or not, as opposed to going off and sending off an RFI and getting quotes and then paying $50,000 and so on, and then coming back and then saying, oh, well, maybe that's not what we wanted. Reduce cost, obviously, and they tend to be workflow-driven. A real true, for a system like this to be a configurable SAS, it needs to be absolutely workflow-driven because otherwise you're back to a flat system and you'll have to write code or integrate other systems to really make everything work. So if we move on to the next slide, this is really summing up what I was just talking about, right? So if we just go forward one more, this is really what Keaton Flex is about, right? So our goal was really to provide IT professionals and CIOs and even CEOs in a lot of where it's strategic. How do you get the best of both worlds? How do you look at custom development and off the shelf and say, hey, you know what? Can I have all of the good things from both of them and none of the downside? And that was really our goal, and that's our vision going forward. So you get 100% tailored solution, total control, works the way your business does, it's integrated, but also you get powerful features, built-in logic, security, and scaling. And you're not getting any of the downside. And the per user cost is really a lot lower because we wouldn't have had to code a system with hundreds of developers over several years. So it's really kind of an economy of scale and economy of simplicity. So if we go to the next slide.
Wayne, this is Kenneth.
Right. Hi.
Quick question. Who within an organization is typically looking for this kind of technology?
That's a very good point. You guys have you've probably heard me say CIO about 10 times since I started, because typically that's the level where I would start working. But in a larger enterprise, although the remit would maybe come from the CIO saying, okay, we want all of our systems moved to the cloud over the next 2 years, or we have the following roadmap for our IT rollout and so on, it can obviously go down the food chain, right? So you've got the VP of IT, you got the various sourcing providers and so on. But then also you have the stakeholders, right? You've got, using CRM, for example, you've got the sales manager or the VP of sales who's looking at his current system and saying, you know what, I'm not getting the information that I need. We need something better. So a lot of the time that can kind of bubble up to the CIO, who then, makes a call and says, okay, well, let's go and do this. But these days, for most CIOs that we've seen, their budgets are getting cut, their staff numbers are getting cut, and everybody is expecting them to really pull off miracles. Everybody is looking at Amazon and Google and so on and saying, hey, why can't you use some of that Google magic to solve all of our problems? I don't understand why I still have to remember 8 passwords. This isn't the 90s. So hopefully that answers your question. So some examples of cloud applications that I see quite commonly, right? HR, CRM, finance, right? Basically internal back office type applications. Now, a lot of these days can also be customer focusing, right? You can have portals and so on. So really anything that's a B2B type application where there's a lot of forms and a lot of interface and people are doing their day-to-day job, they tend not to be the core line of business applications so far. You know, they tend not to be the production line or integrated with machine type applications, but going forward, that's actually something I'd be very excited to see. Obviously, customer-facing portals, right? Being able to expose your existing internal systems and databases to your customers, your partners, and your suppliers so that you're really getting the most out of them. Moving up legacy applications to the cloud, we saw that show up in our poll earlier, and integrating an existing systems, right? So we've all heard about, you know, BI tools, business intelligence tools, and mashups came and went a while ago, but I think mashups can really come back in terms of your ability to pull data from 20 different systems and generate reports and dashboards that are relevant to key people. So if we just go to the next slide. So really this, here we're explaining what is our own product, right? Our own journey and where we've ended up. So this is how we really compare it. So if you look at traditional development, you have your idea. You can see there you kind of architect it, right? You plan it in great detail, but which looks, you know, look very positive and it's a lot of fun. But then you, of course, code everything from scratch, which is very long time to market, and internally that's obviously time to deployment, very high cost, very high risk, and it requires very specialist skills. So you also have, apart from all the other issues, if you can't source developers, you know, good developers, then you're in trouble. With Flex, though, the vision is that you take your idea, but you add on our existing infrastructure, right, with our hosting and servers and backups and all of that stuff and scale. And then you add on predefined components. So I really like that graphic because very often when people ask me what Flex is, I say it's Lego, because it allows people who aren't builders to build things using predefined blocks very, very quickly and get exactly what they want. But they're all very high quality blocks. So the result is better than something that if you would custom coded it. And the result, as you can see there, you know, a very nice office building and so on. So you get exactly what you want, but it's built on very strong technologies. And you can see their benefits. You don't need developers to build or make changes. And we've seen development time. This might sound like an overstatement, but really we have seen development timelines and costs dropped by up to 75%, sometimes even a little bit more, depending on the project. So I think at this stage, this would be where I'd be showing you a very brief demo. And we're getting a little short on time. I'm going to show you a very brief demo of the Keaton Flex application. So I'm going to show my screen here. So I will say that because we're a little short on time, I'm going to do this very, very quickly. So if any of you do have any questions or want to do some form of follow-up, you know, please send a question on the GoToMeeting chat or follow up with us. And I'd absolutely be more than willing to spend some time going through the whole system in detail with you. So this is KeyedIn Flex. You can actually see this instance is KeyedIn Manufacturing, which is another product that we have. KeyedIn Manufacturing was actually built on Flex. This is an instance with manufacturing removed, so it's clean, and I'm able to make a new app from scratch. So if I want to make a new app, I just go to Manage Applications, and I'm just going to build a very, very quick vacation management app. So I call it Vacation App. You can see I've already made quite a few of these. Set status to active, And now I'm going to add my business object. And this is really the secret sauce, right? Because as I add a business object for vacation request, right, then I add another one for employee, let's say, as an example. Right, I just say I do want to use it in a workflow, and I do want to have a tab, and save. So now, right, just done a very, very small amount of clicking, but now I have a working app, right? I can see all vacation requests. I can search vacation requests. So what you're seeing here are really kind of, when we talked about inheritance before, these are kind of pre-configured features that you get out of the box with Flex. So even though I've done nothing except just describe my object, I already have a basic form with some standard fields for tracking, right? You know, is it locked and so on. So if I just drill in, customize the form a little bit. So some of these fields I don't want to see on my form, so I just drag them off. Right? And then, so there's my test form. And then if I want to add new fields to my form, right, then I would just go in and let's say, because it's a vacation request, I want a number for the number of days. No, misspelled that. Right, so I have a number of days that the guy wants off, and I also want it to be a required field. Right? Then I also want to know about the employee. Right, and I want to populate this drop-down with employee, which is this employee object that we just made. Great. Let's clean up my form a little bit more. Okay. All right. So now you can see I can make a test. Test vacation request and save it. Oh, and you see that it's already validating, right? Because I have to add an appropriate number of days. Okay, and now I can drill in. I can see my number of days, right? But also I can go in and I can look at employees. Right, so I just add an employee here real quick. Okay, and everything here is completely configurable. So all of these searches, grids, and drop-downs and so on, I can totally change. I can even go so far as to make this grid editable and quick add. So if I have users that are kind of more familiar with an Excel type of a background, then you can get load up here, you can get this kind of interface where I'm able to add multiple items and update all of them, and then still though all of my business logic and validation still kicks in. And then if I wanted to go into the workflow designer and put some business logic behind it, just give this a moment to load up. In here, for example, right, vacation request, you can see my objects match up, right? So if I go to the new event from my vacation request, now I've got a workflow that fires automatically every time somebody creates a new vacation request. Right? And in here, for example, just to wire it up very quickly, I'd do something like a user action where I would prompt the finance team to approve. Okay, so who do I assign it to? I can drill in, I can pick a particular user, I can, let's say, assign it to the administrator role there. And for Dubai, I can do something like now plus 2 days, and Flex will actually parse and understand that. So I could say now plus 5 minutes, now plus 2 months, and depending on the business calendar that I select, that's going to fire off in exactly 2 working days. I could even do it right down to 1 hour or 20 minutes, and it will escalate if it goes past that particular time within that particular calendar range. So that's really the demo. I don't want to take up too much time for you guys with the actual demo of the application, because we're here to talk more about where we see the vision and so on. So, David, you want to take back control? Okay, great. And now we're really into the wrap-up and the key takeaways. So really, hopefully you guys have found this useful today. What have we learned? Hopefully, applications and development are changing rapidly, right? I mean, there's been more change in the past 2 years than there had been in the 5 years before that, and I really believe in the next year it'll be twice that again. What used to take years is literally now possible in days. I mean, you saw what I could build there in 2 minutes. With 2 days, you could build a full CRM, full HR application. Just moving the old stuff to the cloud, it's not enough. You're just moving the dirt. You still have the same problem. And again, the real fundamental lesson that we all need to learn is that the shorter the gap between the user and the developer, the better. Until ultimately the user who understands the problem is actually the one logging in and making changes and doing the configuration. So thank you very much. Kenneth and David, perhaps you guys would like to wrap up.
Wayne and Rich, I just want to say thank you very much. And just again to the folks in the audience, if you have any final questions, please submit them. Just give about 20 more seconds. So in closing, I just want to say thank you for all the attendees today, and to our hosts, the Outsourcing Institute and KeyedIn Solutions. Thanks to everyone. One last item. As David mentioned at the beginning, he is going to be sending out an email tomorrow to all attendees with a link to a recording of today's presentation.
Great. Okay, well, everybody, thank you for your time. Hopefully you found this useful, and I look forward to speaking to some of you.